So, James Clapper, the recently departed Director of National Intelligence, has been making the rounds lately on political talk shows, and he did just that this morning on the various Sunday shows. And I wanted to highlight a quote of his that he uttered on the George Stephanopoulos program on ABC because I think it's illustrative of some of the dangers that are attendant to this incessant fixation on Russia. And I should note that some of the fixation is justified given that Trump apparently acted in a highly rash fashion in response to an investigation that pertains to it. So I'm not saying that the fixation is necessarily unjustified, but we should at least also be cognizant of the consequences of the fixation, because they're having because those consequences can be very detrimental if they're not handled appropriately and if they're not processed accurately. So what do I mean? So here's something that Comey said. He was asked about something that Clapper said about the Comey firing. Clapper, who had worked with Comey pretty closely over the years, obviously was unnerved and troubled by the firing and expressed that as diplomatically as he could, which is to say this. So Clapper said that the Comey firing should be considered, quote, another victory on the scoreboard for Russia. So James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence, who is the facilitator for the intelligence community of the United States, has asserted that the main implication of the firing of Comey is that it's going to be regarded by Russian state actors as a victory. So they're cheering and celebrating this firing because somehow it furthers Russian interests. And Comey, and Clapper elaborates on this point. And this is a point that's been made repeatedly in a variety of fora. It's been made before Congress, in the media. This is a widely believed position. This is what Clapper says. Anything which, quote, sows doubt, discord, and dissension, end quote, is a victory for Russia. So if something takes place in the United States which causes citizens to doubt the veracity of official statements or causes them to have doubts about the integrity of their institutions, then that's a victory for Russia, according to this formulation. Anything which creates discord in the United States or dissension. What is dissension? Dissension is when there are, when the people are not in accord with one another, when they are at each other, having disagreements with one another, or when there is, not a conformity of thought. That's what dissension stems from. So Clapper is stating that dissension alone, anything which causes dissension in the United States, meaning vociferous, heated debate, that's a form of dissension. That's a victory for Russia. And again, this same point was reiterated in various ways in Congress, and it's basically taken as a given now. And why is this so destructive? Well, think of the Director of National Intelligence report that was issued in early January prior to Trump assuming office. Obama ordered that an expedited report be issued on the Russian hacking allegations. And in that report, which was supposed to focus on the genesis of the hacking, and was supposed to assign blame to specific actors for that hacking, the author went on a tangent and started ranting about RT, Russia Today. And one of the things he talked about was how RT gave outsized coverage to the Occupy Wall Street movement. Now, what a movement that had its heyday in 2011 had to do with a report in 2017 on specific hacking claims is still not entirely clear, but basically the report made an ideological critique. It was that Russian media has, in its campaign to influence American society, has chosen to focus or highlight news which, quote, sows doubt, discord, and dissension in the U.S. And according to this report, Occupy Wall Street served those purposes. So if the current atmosphere was present in 2011, then the people who were protesting under the banner of Occupy Wall Street, because they were formulating a systemic critique of American society and institutions and political culture, thereby creating doubt and discord and dissension, they could have been reasonably portrayed as unwitting agents of Russia because they were doing the bidding of Russia according to this logic. What Russia seeks is for Americans to have less faith or to have lessened faith in their institutions. And because Occupy Wall Street did that for a lot of people, then Occupy Wall Street could have just been a Russian ploy. And it is true that RT actually did give comprehensive coverage to the Occupy movement in 2011. But you know why they got a lot of traction in doing that? It was because American media gave it horrible coverage. I mean, for the most part. First of all, in the early stages of Occupy Wall Street, they didn't cover it at all. Or if they did, it was very mocking and dismissive. And once the movement gained some steam, it did get pretty significant coverage, but often the coverage would align with the police narrative, or basically the government narrative about how protesters were, deserved what was coming to them, or they did things that required police to crack down on them violently. And RT was there highlighting those abuses, and there were genuine abuses. I was witness to many of them myself. So the idea that in highlighting those genuine stories, those legitimate stories that deserve to be highlighted, RT was just fulfilling this Russian government aim is, I guess it's mildly plausible, but to think of it in those terms delegitimizes the airing of genuine grievances in the United States, because they could just be depicted as furthering Russian goals. So what this is doing, I think, I mean, just think of how expansive of a terrain that is. If you're saying that any event which causes doubt, dissension, or discord in the U.S. is in some sense in furtherance of Russian state goals, that could encompass almost anything. I mean, that could encompass a protest against police violence. So if the police take some action which exceeds their authority or which results in some violence and people protest the violent act, what is an effect of the protest? Well, it's to sow doubt in the legitimacy of the police as an institution. And the protesters could be correct to do that, but according to this logic, they're also unwittingly helping Russia. So that's why this is so insidious. It could seep into all different aspects of American political life if it's allowed to just go unchallenged. I think it's actually setting the contours of the new ideological contours of the Cold War, the new Cold War 2.0. So we're basically in the midst of Cold War 2.0. I mean, we just kind of sleptwalked into it. People have embraced it. But the thing that's different about this Cold War, as opposed to the one that everybody knows that ended in 1991, is that the ideological features of this Cold War are kind of inverted or warped. Obviously, the United States is not combating Russian communism. I mean, there's not a clear-cut ideological stakes here. That's why. But in order for people to get on board with this Cold War hysteria, new ideological contours have to be kind of confabulated, or they have to be assigned to the present conflict. And partially, that new ideological divide is assigning to Russia this idea that they're the geopolitical linchpin for every emergent right-wing populism movement, or even, and in some cases, left-wing populism movement. They can be assigned to Russia. Remember, during the presidential campaign, Hillary Clinton gave a speech in August of last year, and she called Putin the, quote, grand godfather of global nationalism. So that was Hillary Clinton and the Democrats trying to set the terms, the ideological terms of the new Cold War. And what also flows from that, in addition to this nationalism argument, is this idea that Russia seeks to sow doubt, discord, and dissension. It's a destructive thing because it's going to delegitimize people who are engaged in all sorts of perfectly honorable activity as somehow stooges for Putin, which they are most certainly not. But a lot of this stems from one reason why I wanted to talk about this is because if you look at the reaction to Trump's firing of Comey, one of the main critiques that you'll see leveled is that in doing this, Trump has committed an assault on U.S. institutions. Clapper reiterated a version of this. Actually, Greg Popovich, the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs, who were robbed of victory today, I don't know if you watched the game, he, for some reason, went on a political rant today as well and called Trump, quote, dangerous to our institutions, and he was obviously referencing the Comey firing. But the thing is, when you level that critique, you're necessarily limiting the resonance of that critique to a pretty narrow sliver of the population. And why is that? Well, if you're committed to maintaining and preserving U.S. institutions, there's a pretty good chance that you've benefited materially from the status quo because the institutions that you want to preserve have created conditions that are favorable to you and your family and your social cohort, and therefore you want to keep that going. But if you're like most Americans and you really haven't benefited materially from the status quo, and you have no good reason to have faith in U.S. institutions, this critique of Trump that he's undermining our institutions doesn't really register all that much because you never had any reason to affirm the value of institutions to begin with. So why should you be concerned that Trump is further corroding them? So you'll see establishmentarian types like Clapper and others, level some version of that criticism, and I don't think it's particularly resonant with huge swaths of the population who rightly have very little reason to, again, have faith in American institutions. And that, of course, will be somehow attributed to Russia now that they have that their faith has been diminished. But really, I mean, you can find the causes for that diminishment of faith in institutions within the United States. I mean, there are plenty of purely domestic reasons why that faith has been corroded and why the trust has been diminished. But what this Russia mania allows for is for grievances and problems to be projected outwards rather than to occasion an inward-looking evaluation of what actually ails American society. So that is a basic point that I wanted to make. Not very basic. Obviously, you could probably write a treatise on this stuff. But I find it, I mean, you'll have to forgive me if every time I talk about this subject, I inevitably get people screaming, You're dwelling on Russia. You're fixated. Well, I mean, it's the number one issue in the country right now. It's all anybody's talking about. It's hugely interesting to me, and it has many dimensions that I think need to be carefully parsed. It has significant geopolitical consequences, national security consequences. It has a very tangible component that impacts directly our domestic politics. So, I mean, if you don't like my talking about it, sorry. I think it's absolutely crucial, and I'm going to continue doing it for as long as it's a live issue, which seems probably to mean that I'll be talking about it for the foreseeable future. And if you are not happy with that, there are other options available to you on the internet. I can be pretty certain of that. So that'll do it for tonight. Everybody have a good evening wherever you might be, and I will see you later.